Well, a very big welcome. Okay. Very big welcome to everyone. We're so happy to have you. And we're looking forward to this evening's special interview. For those of you who haven't been on the program before, this is BlakPak. And BlakPak was started in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And in fact, we started with a session that looked at the book that I wrote, I Can't Breathe. And we had such a outpouring of connection from the community that said it was really good to just come together to talk about all things related to Black issues. And so BlakPak alternates every month between an interview session with a solo person, like we have this evening with Grace, and something that we call critical conversations, where we bring people from across the world, experts in various fields. Last month, we had a really powerful session on Black people and autism. And it was really inspiring, not only the presenters, but the people in the audience. There was so much expertise and so much caring poured out, and ideas and support. And this is what we want this to come from this BlakPak, you know, that we can really support each other as a community and support the excellence that we have amongst us. And tonight we have a very special guest, an amazing career, very varied, and my personal experience of Grace is seeing her as a champion of building the confidence and giving expression to young people's creativity in a really marvelous way through her organizational called WAPI, which I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more of. So welcome one and all, and I'll hand you over now to the host for the evening, Marge Loha.
Thanks, Mervyn. Thank you very much indeed. That's lovely to hear, and it is lovely to see Grace. And before I go further into this actual evening, Mervyn said that we started as a result of talking about his book, I Can't Breathe. But I'm going to give an early push at this point, because on the 25th of May, I believe, Mervyn, that there's going to be an event at the Black Cultural Archives, where again, you will be doing a talk about the book, having some readings and having a Q&A. So if any of you are free and you'd like to book, I think it's on the Black Cultural Archives website, please do so. I was hunting around for a copy of the book before we came on, and I couldn't find it because I think I've given the last couple of copies away yet again. To get some new copies. So that was that. And we'll tell you about next month later on when we'll be doing a Windrush session. But here we are again, and the reason for the BlakPak conversation, as I said, as Mervyn said, it's one of two events. But the BlakPak interview that we're having this evening, it's really where we interview guests, or we bring to life that saying that says, we stand on giants' shoulders. We bring to life the fact that we know that we have achieved because other people have helped us to get there, because of what they've done to inspire, what they've done to push, what they've done to knock doors down, and so on. And that is the purpose of the BlakPak interview, is just to actually identify these giants and to invite them to have a word with us. And we have a particular format, and the format we have, again, if you're a regular, you know the format, but if you're not, what we do is we ask them to reach into their BlakPak. That's our name for the BlakPak. We ask them to reach into that and to choose 4 items that they're going to share with us. And in doing so, items that have inspired them, items that have held them together, maybe when the going was tough, items that have allowed them to actually get things done. We ask them to share those with us. And in doing so, we learn more of their story, not just about the things that the public know, but something about them as individuals and what has caused them to do the things they have done. So this evening, our guest is Cllr Grace Quansah. And it's always interesting when I hear someone, you know, when I call someone counselor, because that immediately puts me in a frame of mind as to what I think they are. And because I have known Grace for a number of years, I know that she, in my mind, is far more than what I would put down in the role of counselor. But you'll hear more as we go along. But even before we go any further, remember the rule is any questions you want to ask, because when we're finished the interview, We'll have a chance for questions. Do pop it in the chat. And when everything is over, we'll have yet another afterglow sessions where we talk off camera. So, Cllr Grace Quansah, aka Akuba, community champion, activist, award-winning storyteller, and boy, is she a very good storyteller. I have writer, editor, educator, dedicated to empowering marginalized young people, founder of the award-winning WAPI project. And that means, WAPI means writing, acting, and publishing project for youngsters. Now, in Grace's first speech as a counselor, she said something like this. I think I'm quoting verbatim. She says, "I will bring good trouble to Ealing." Now, I wanted to say that in what I thought might be a Ghanaian accent, but I was a bit frightened to try it in case I got it wrong. But she said, "I will bring good trouble to Ealing." And I'm wondering how that good trouble has played out. We might hear something more of that later on. But I know that Grace is passionate about education and about creating dialogue, about having, she's had some interesting experience educationally wise in terms of struggle. Also as a child suffering from, not suffering, experiencing, and it's important that I change the terminology, experiencing displacement and discrimination. But all of these, I think, have shaped her, and her keen ears and eyes have provided rich subject for her poetry, her storytelling, her writing. In particular, she's the creator of the Marcus Garvey-inspired educational resource that's called Unpacking That Trunk. And that's based on her father's work, and I'm sure we're going to hear a bit more about that later. Her father's work with the Ghanaian shipping liner, the Black Star Line. And those of you who know a bit more of the history will know how that's been associated with Marcus Garvey. Her tireless community-focused activities have included campaigning in support of local libraries. She's campaigned and improved services for rough sleepers. She's organized poetry reading in the community. She's done Black Lives Matter. She's done so many activities to not just bring the community together, but to agitate when there's a need to agitate for change, as well as the great encouragement work with young people. Grace's get up and go and get up and do attitude. Nothing short of inspirational. Okay, folks, let us welcome our guest for the evening, Grace Akuba Quansah. Grace, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Marge and Mervyn. I feel very honoured. You're personal friends. We've worked together on many projects in collaboration with WAPI and Bogle Overture Press, Uncle Eric and Mother Jessica. So I just feel so honoured to be here in this context. Thank you.
It is our pleasure that you said yes. Now, you know the format, but I'm not going to start by asking you to dig into your BlakPak just as yet, because I just want us to start by getting a little bit more context as to where you're coming from. I've given some introduction and I've thrown out a couple of things there about displacement, about struggles and so on. But what I want to start is by asking you, if you can, in your own words, just pull out a few things, just thinking about where you are. When we talk of you now, we talk about a storyteller, we talk about an activist, we talk about an educator. But would you mind sharing with us a couple of pointers in your life that has shaped you to allow you to get to what I call your break, when the break arrived, when you discovered yourself in these formats?
Well, there were so many breaks, but let me highlight that as a child, firstly, I was born in Isleworth, 1962, to my mother, Esther Quansah, and my father, Solomon Quansah. And I was privately fostered out for 5 years because it was difficult against the backdrop of hostile Britain in the 1960s. So at some point from Essex, living with a white working class family, I ended up in Ghana with an uncle who was a friend of my father's Uncle Vitus. And I was in this boarding school known as Ola in Elmina in Cape Coast. And I can remember as a child at the age of 5.5, 6, in this boarding school, being pulled out to read out poetry on a big card for the rest of the class to listen. And even as a child, I would be thinking to myself, what am I doing here? And yet here I am being used as an example to read out verse. So at that age, I think I was aware of the fact that I had a gift in storytelling, in reciting words, rhymes, and in attracting people to listen. I was born breech. So when I use the word troublemaker, I was born against nature. So that was a warning to my mother that I was going to make trouble, good trouble in the world. Now, another, I would say, defining moment for me was many years ago. I know this woman. She will remain anonymous. She found me when I was in Ealing doing a poetry recital day with Uncle Eric, and she was homeless. She literally found me and came and started reading poetry with her home on her back. And I got home and I thought, something's not right. She rang me. She got a shopkeeper to ring me at night time. And I said, what's happening? She said, I'm going around on the bus, Grace. That catapulted me into starting a fundraising campaign, literally using Facebook, private WhatsApp. I just asked everybody I could ask to reach out and donate whatever they could. And it culminated with me getting her off the streets into B&B, from B&B into sometimes a guest house. Ultimately, I managed to get her off the streets and working with St. Mungo's, eventually Ealing Housing Council managed to house her. And I'm thinking, wow, I have the power to do that, and people have the option to work with me. And I opened my eyes because I went around with this woman, a white Irish elderly woman who had no passport. I had to use my passport as ID to help her access hotel accommodation or guest house accommodation. And I was shocked. This was just before the pandemic. And I'm thinking, if I can do this, there's more that I can do. But I didn't even think in terms of, that I want to become a counsellor one day. I just realized that it is important and it's possible to use your voice and use your power to campaigning ability to help make a difference for those who are vulnerable. And I don't see myself in necessarily in any way different. We can all be in this situation one day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Grace. That starting point. But before we even go further, there's something you mentioned that I want to pick up a little bit. You just said it just as a matter of fact. You said, I was fostered with, up until the age of 5. And then you went to live with Uncle, whoever, I can't remember his name. In Ghana.
Uncle Vitus.
Yeah. Now it's interesting because when you said that, my things sparked up for me, because it sounded very much like, you're saying you're fostered at that early age. I know for many of the children from the Caribbean that they often were left with aunts and uncles while the parents came to the UK in order to start. So just tell us something about the why the fostering at this young age, first in the UK, then in Ghana. Can you just tell us?
Well, thank you, Marge. My father came to London initially to study, first to be a pilot, but he's suffered from that vertigo, where you have a fear of heights. So he switched from learning how to fly to nautical engineering at Southampton University. And my mother and father knew each other in Ghana, but they fell in love in London. My mother came to London in the late 50s to become a nurse. So she trained at the Old King Edward's, become a nurse, and then midwifery sister. And when I was born, it was just difficult in those days to find private accommodation. If you did, you were likely to have one room in a big house owned by somebody else. So it was very much an instrumental, pragmatic practice, more than they wanted me to stay with any particular family for a length of time. And I've read up the stories of Lem Sasse. There are quite a few celebrities and ordinary people who, I say ordinary, he's ordinary too, but who've actually, non-celebrities, who've actually gone through this process of private fostering. And it's very common in Ghana to be brought up by your maternal grandmother or even a friend of the family. The trust is there because it takes a village to raise a child. Hence, so they found this white working class family in Essex through the High Commission. And the idea is I was going to stay for a very short while. And I do believe my mother came and went, though I didn't actually understand who she was in relation to Daddy and Mummy Cllr. So at some point, as I went to the age of 5, I was just about to start school. I can remember starting school in Essex, Gideon Park. Some children in this school were looking at me. I had a foster brother the same age as me, so I was quite close to him. My dad said, to my mum, look at Grace, doesn't know Ghana. No. The family are very good, but we have to take her back. We have to take her to Ghana so she knows where she comes from. So the idea that heritage was very important to me, even though I was privately fostered. So at some point, my parents came and took me. I actually traveled with them on board one of my dad's ships. Can you imagine a 5-year-old standing in this ship with the captain and my father as a radio officer, just looking and just having this experience of traveling with these people who say they were my parents. One minute I'm with a white family, now I'm with a black. I was aware of color, but I didn't understand what was going on. I just thought it was a big adventure. Ended up in Ghana, but lo and behold, I didn't go to stay with my parents in Ghana. I was reintroduced to another foster family. He was also not a biological relative. Uncle Vitus was head of the Cocoa Marketing Board and Ministry of Culture. So I went from being in a working class family to an elite family. Uncle Vitus was a divorced man and he had children. Some were his biological children, but not necessarily from the same woman. And it was interesting. A woman he may have had, relations with, brought the child and said, right, you're going to look after your child. So he had wonderful children and we all went to boarding school and he looked after me. But I experienced bullying at the boarding school. Some of my siblings didn't like me because I was very different. I spoke with an English accent. I was getting all the attention. I was having baked beans transported from London. And whilst in Elmina, I didn't actually understand way back in the 60s, this powerful structure, Elmina Castle, the World Heritage Centre, was there in the background.
All right, I'm going to stop you there because I know I want to hear more of that later on. And I'm not just stopping her for nothing, folks.
No, I hear you.
She's got a lot of stories to tell. So we'll come back to the Elmina in the background in a short while. For now, though, so what I'm hearing is that you've got this childhood where you have been displaced, but you've also, somewhere along the lines, you've come to the point where you're also recognizing the power to do something, to make a difference. And that also, that whole pivoting moment with the homeless person, and that pushes you into thinking you can make it even a greater difference by going into politics, local politics. Okay, so that's, and I know there are other parts of the journey we will hear about a little later. So it gives me good time to now say, all right, Grace, I know Wappy came along the way at some point, but let's just dip into that BlakPak. Let's just dip into the stories that come from what are those other pointers that have taken you to where you are. And I'm going to ask you therefore for your first item. What is the first item you're going to share with us? And what's the story behind it?
Well, my first item is Yesterday I Cried by Jana van Zandt. I came across the book in 1999. It was published in 1998. And it's, for me, it was like a manual, which it actually states on the book. It shows lessons in loving and learning, how to cope with displacement, how to cope with rejection, abandonment, and any negative dynamics in life, and to overcome them. Yes, it's important to cry. You have to cry to get in touch with your pain, but through crying, you also have tears of joy. So this woman is an inspirational coach. She's a preacher, and I'm also a Christian. That didn't come out in my profile, but I believe in God, and I believe in the power of transformation. So for me, this book spoke to me about not giving up, turning a negative into a positive, and always knowing that you have the spirit there. My name Grace means a gift from God that you do not deserve. So I felt very strongly that I needed to respond to my name, and this book gave me an opportunity to, because this one is also very graceful and very, very spiritual, that you can believe in the power of the spirit to transform your life and to help others to go forward. So you can become an example, or other people are an example, but you must never give up hope. And that's what I got from that book. I cried when I read the book. I couldn't put it down. And it was medicine. It was medicine. It is a manual how to deal with struggle and to end up, always looking forward. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but if there's no opportunity, you create that opportunity. Never say never, and never give up. So my cup is always overflowing. Even when there's nothing, I will turn water into wine. And if not wine, juice, whatever. That's what I get from that book.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's not a bad thing to cry because it washes your spirit.
Yeah, I must say, I know the writer you're referring to. In fact, one of the things I've just got here, one of the quotes from that particular book, when she says, "You can accept or reject the way you are treated by other people, but until you hear the wounds of your past, you will continue to bleed." And that moved me very much. So thank you very much for that. So that seems to be something that has been put part of not just the fire, but that strength, as you say, that strength to overcome, to keep going. And when I do need any water to be turned into juice to come. So thank you for that. Okay, what about your second item then? What would you like to share with us as a second item that you'd like to pull out of your backpack?
The second item is the memory of me returning to Ghana. What I didn't say earlier is that I was always into writing and storytelling, so it became cathartic. And over the years, even though I didn't achieve at school against the politics of education in the 70s, I underachieved, went out, did go to night school to gather more O-levels, and then went out, got a job. Eventually, I'm nannying in Italy, came back and applied to university, used my experience with Dr. Bernardo's to give me entry as a mature student because I didn't have A-levels. The writing was the thing that always saved me. So I was writing poetry, I was writing stories, and then one day, Mia Morris, Black History Month leader, she sent me an email saying, you know, apply to do this, enter this competition, which was led by Mary Blackman in conjunction with Random House Children's Books. Lo and behold, I was joint winner in a book called Unheard Voices, which is around the time of the celebration or marking of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act 2007. So it was returning to Ghana with 5 friends from Ealing, all of us movers and shakers. And we traveled, got to Ghana. From Accra, we ended up on this Panifestra, which is a biannual festival. Brings people from the diaspora and local Ghanaians to celebrate. At that time, it was abolition and Ghana independence. And can you imagine coming back to Ghana, performing my poem, The Awakening of Elmina, which was published in this, you know, really amazing book by Mary Blackman with the greats like James Barry, Benjamin Zephaniah, Sandra Agard. I was in this book, Catherine Johnson, with them, and performing my poem at Cape Coast Castle, a slave fort, which is similar to Elmina Castle, hearing the waves beating, and everybody was quiet. And I'm thinking 500 years ago, my ancestors, they were captured here, enslaved. Some of my ancestors threw themselves into the waves rather than be taken on that transatlantic journey to, you know, other parts of the world, to be living a life which was not part of there. So for me, that was a defining moment. Not only had I had my work recognized in a book, and I was there with the greats, I had gone back home after being raised in Ghana as a child and not knowing what Elmina was about. Now I was back in Cape Coast. I visited Elmina with my friends, and then I was performing my poem, The Awakening of Elmina, and it made people cry. I didn't realize the hotel where we were staying, the daughter of the manager filmed it. There was about not even a pin could drop. It was so sad. All you could hear was the waves and my poem. And I ended up by saying, thank you, my ancestors, because if it wasn't for you, I would not be here today. And thank you, God.
Thank you. Very powerful. Thank you very much. Thank you. I knew that we'll come back to Elmina, and I'm going to just stay there for one little second. You said, because when you grew up almost as it were in the shadow of Elmina. You went back and you had this very powerful moment at Cape Coast and so on. And now you're understanding something of the weight of the historical moment, as it were.
Yes.
Tell me, so when you were as a child living in Elmina, I think that was the name of the place.
That's correct. It was called, Elmina is the area, and the school was called Ola Ola Convent. It was run by Catholic nuns, and it was very strict. At that time, I was following the Catholic faith, and you know, we had to pray, say Hail Marys, and even when it was Lent, we had to fast. It was a very strict regime. And yes, were you going to ask me a question in relation to that?
Yes. The point I wanted to make was it ever, did the people there ever talk about what happened as we, the children, as it were, and the ancestors of slaves, did they ever talk about what happened then? Do you recall it?
No, I can quite honestly say no, because I think even when I went back to do my master's several years after obviously being raised as a child, the impact of colonialism was such that the local people didn't really appreciate the history of why, you know, that castle was there, and the relationship between the undevelopment of Africa with the rest of the world, capitalism.
Yes.
It took me to do a degree and moreover a master's in anthropology and to return to Ghana just before I did this poetry performance to understand from a critical perspective what was going on. But you know, it was just so bizarre. But as a child, I didn't get that input. I didn't get that understanding at all, because the people that are so impacted by colonialism that you end up absorbing the ideology of the so-called ruling class, if one can call it that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for that. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight off then to ask you for the third item that you've got in your BlakPak to share with us.
The power of protest. So many different examples, but way back in 2018, around January, I love libraries. I partly self-educated myself in a library, loved reading books, prolific reader as a child, and of course through WAPI I used to work in libraries doing workshops, and my friends are many librarians. So I think this 15th of January 2018, it was on the news, Cllr, a big company that managed construction and other agencies, had collapsed. And I have a friend, I don't know if she's on the call, Amapoku, she was a librarian in Ealing, has moved to SOAS. And I rang her and she said, no, well, yeah. She said, you know, the lights have gone on, Grace. What are we going to do? We're all worried about our jobs. I'd never done a petition in my life. Did a little bit of research, contacted some colleagues, some friends who I knew, Benjamin Zafanai, Michael Rosen, Patrice, I think Vivian French, who had done the forward for the first WAPI publication, and others, you know, emailed, and went on to change.org, used Benjamin's photograph, did a little write-up, and then I started this petition. And within 2.5 weeks, we had gathered enough signatures, imagine, to literally force Ealing Library to take all the libraries back in-house. And I didn't know. I met somebody called David Robbins, a librarian activist, Alan Wiley, who's a national librarian, campaigner, Dr. Rupa Huck. Well, there were friends coming from everywhere. Save NHS, Ealing Trade Union Council, so many of us. But somebody emailed me and said, Grace, you've done it. I went, what do you mean I've done it? What have I done? Ealing has taken the libraries back in-house. And I thought, wow. And the protest still continued to other matters, but that made me realize that one voice, so with friends, the personalist political, Carl Hirsch said that a long time ago, and I restructured that to say, whatever goes on in your personal life can hit you out there globally. The two are in what goes on globally can hit you locally in your backyard. So whatever affects you and hits you, you can use that as an inspiration, as fire to make a difference. And that's where I think I began to, I didn't think then I was going to become a counsellor. In fact, I was invited by friends. Some of them were on the library campaign. But I realized that you can make a difference and you can take on the giants. So long as you believe and you have support, we see lots of strikes going on now. You have to have the courage to go further. And that's where I think that yeah, that's where that story comes from, really, that narrative about the power of personal campaigning.
Thank you for that. I'm going to still stay with that for a little bit longer, because that is, you know, everything that you're saying, there is such passion and power. And I want to link back now, because we've mentioned so far WAPI, but we haven't said any detail. I think anyone on the line now who might know you will feel that's okay, I know all about it. But one of the things I'd like you to tell us about WAPI in a minute, because I want to ask you, how do those youngsters who in WAPI, and when you've told us other people understand, how do they view this person yourself who's out there agitating, doing things? And my goodness, you know, anyone that's having anything, you want to shove WAPI in there and says, here, I've got some young people, use them, do it, and so on. How do they view their inspiration, their person? What's the relationship? But tell us firstly about WAPI.
Well, partly because as a young child, I always liked writing and reading, and I had parents who were more scientifically minded. So it was a bit of a like matter out of place, you know, parents who are into science, and I'm an artist. So I felt very lonely as a child. You know, I didn't really have the audience to listen to my writings, and I wanted to perform. And as I grew up, I realized that everywhere I went, whether it was at church, whether it was at school, whether it was doing a play group, whatever, there were children around me that reminded me of me. And I knew youngsters, I struggled at school, I experienced racism, exclusion, and I knew that my own children, I have four children, 3 of whom have different forms, different disabilities, and I've struggled with the schools to get their, you know, abilities recognized. And often I think that every child has an ability. Even with a disability, they have an ability. It's society that has to change. But I found that a lot of children, they think outside of the box, and they're not being recognized. And all they need is a confidence for someone to believe in them. As I had tutors and teachers and special teachers who believed in me. So I said, let me start up some sort of organization. I had a friend of mine, close friend of mine, we've known each other from childhood. Her daughter was published in a book called Middlesex, I think, Poets. And I was in her house. And at the time, Cllr Grace, who runs Positive Awareness, a charity organization that it supports people to set up projects. It literally was a eureka moment where I was reading my friend's daughter's poem in this book. Cllr rang me to say, if you've got an idea, Grace, we will back you. We can add our charity to your project. And then I got this email from Ealing Council, 2008. They were offering funding for some universities. So those 3 things, I came home, my big son, I said, you know what, I'm going to set up something about creative writing. We started messing around with words. He says, no, WAPI's gone. Let's try WAPI. Writing, acting. We literally put it together like that. I put a proposal together, and then I contacted Youth Connections. I think I've forgotten her name, but she runs Head of Youth Connections, sent in the proposal. And then I think I contacted Cllr Grace, and everything came together. We got £750, only £750 from Ealing Council. I did my own publicity, 9 children, including my son and another young person who has stayed in contact, one of the pioneers, Michael Labbies. Labbies, as you remember, a group of boys from 9 children. And then we had Mother Jessica Huntley and Uncle Eric Huntley on board. They were on board from the very beginning. With 3 weeks in the summer holiday, at the end of the summer holiday, we would do a performance. And the whole idea of WAPI was, we wanted our children to be able to write their own scripts. There were loads of drama groups out there. We wanted them to write their own scripts and to develop the confidence to perform their own scripts and to get their work out there in any shape or form. So although it started as a literary organization, it developed into any creative expression. So poetry, spoken word, art, the children drew their own illustrations for the book, music, when they did performances, they performed, and then we got invited to the Huntley Conference. And through Maureen Roberts, who used to work for the LMA, London Metropolitan Archives, she managed to get funding in conjunction with Bogle Overture Press. And you remember that because Marvin, you were also involved in putting our first book together, The Soul of a Child. We got Vivian French, a Scottish writer, to be our forward, as well as Nia Parks. And we had Bogle publish our books of 35 writers. 4 years later, it took us to do the first book. Everything was put together by the children. And I remember, Marge, when you handed out all these books on the 19th of February, 2011. You know why I remember? Because my father died on the 19th of February, 1976. And I remember, do you remember I broke down and cried as the books were being handed out to all, and these children were looking, oh, is that my work? Is that me? I'm an author? Some of these children were failing at school. They didn't want to go to school. But here, their works were in print. And that is something no one can ever take away from you.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace. Thanks. So in part of me answering that question, then, what do they think of their inspirational leader? I have seen what they've thought of. Think highly of you. They are very, very grateful, and I see how they have blossomed and how they play guitar and they sing,
yes,
and they perform, and so on.
Yes.
So yes, that opportunity is absolutely fantastic. And what you say about seeing your name in print.
Yes.
Okay, before I ask the last question, I just want to remind people that we're coming to the last question. We're coming towards the end of this interview. And if you want to ask questions of Grace yourself, do put them in the chat and we'll put them to her in a while and so on. But Grace, it's the last one now. It is the last item. You've given us your book. You've told us about standing, going back to Ghana. As your father says, the children have got to go back to know their culture. But you've gone back years and you've performed. You've actually protested. You've made a difference and so on. Those are the points. What's the last item you're going to share with us?
Well, my father's trunk. You see, because I remember I have these visions of my father coming home from one of his trips, hiding behind the setting. My mum saying, your dad's not here. Then he would jump up and hold me and hug me. And I was so excited. He would bring some object, some present from everywhere he went, whether it was Italy or whether it was, you know, I don't know, Kenya or some America. But then sadly, he died. He died in Ghana when he was still an officer in 1976. And for the matrilineal account, you actually keep the spouse would keep their partner's items. And in theory, the family are meant to, father's family are meant to come and collect. That didn't happen. So we had my father's big shipping trunk in my mother's house from 1976 right up to 2013. Different things happened. She had to downsize. We wanted her to live nearer us. I live in Acton, my mum's just down the road. So as part of that downsizing, we opened up his trunk. Now, she would have opened it up when he died, folded some things up, but didn't go into it too deeply. 35 years or more of dust came out of that trunk when we opened it up. We found his sailor's officer's uniform, a hat. We found, I don't know, like the most iconic thing that we found was a sketched picture. It could have been about 80 years old, or I don't know. And it had an image of Marcus Garvey, it had an image of Kwame Nkrumah, and the first captain of the first Black Star Line ship, which he was Captain Techi Manson. And the ship was on its maiden voyage from Takoradi, but you'd see the Statue of Liberty in the background, which also told you it was on its way to America, and people waving it off from Takoradi port. This was a time, believe it or not, around 2013 October, when Julius Garvey was in London, and he was actually being hosted at the Foreign Office. That was sadly the last time I saw Mother Jess, because she was in the audience, along with many other local campaigners, politicians, artists, maybe even yourselves. And the PowerPoint wasn't working, so I had to produce this picture, the original picture from my father's trunk. There was Julius Garvey looking at a picture of his dad, which had been in my father's trunk. And I understood the relationship between my dad's work as a Pan-Africanist leader. He wasn't a leader in the sense that Marcus Garvey was, but he absorbed the ideology of both Nkrumah and Marcus Garvey, this back to Africa, be proud of who you are, you know, and that was the link between the two of them, because Marcus Garvey, of course, set up the Black Star Line in the 1970, but it ran for a few years and it didn't work, but that wasn't his fault. He had a lot of people who betrayed him, and Nkrumah took his legacy up to name the shipping company after Marcus Garvey's initiative. So my father was one of the first officers, and I didn't know my dad. I didn't know the work he did. So through developing this workshop and program, unpacking my father's trunk, unpacking the trunk, which was really giving children, whatever class, creed and color they are, anywhere they came from, a sense that if they open up a kind of pretend trunk, which I bring around to schools and classes, out of there you pull objects, and out of this object handling you develop a narrative. So through my dad's work and not having the opportunity to say goodbye to him, he would always be with me, both structurally, because I brought the trunk to my house, and through the work that I do, and empower young people again to find their voice. And so it has a link between, say, like travel, migration, why we travel from one country to another to find a better life. We hear a lot about the Windrush. We're going to celebrate 75 years of Windrush. That's fantastic. There is a relationship between Windrush and you know, sort of like Pan-Africanism. So we have different journeys and relationship. We all, I believe, we cannot separate the link between our African roots. African roots first, we came by choice or by force to the diaspora, and we have gone from the different parts of the diaspora to become who we are today. So I think unpacking the trunk for me is about unpacking my heritage, and also believing that I believe in the power of unity, and that Africa should be united, because that was Nkrumah's discourse, that was to some extent Marcus Garvey's discourse, and that was where my father felt that he married my mother, he lived in London, we had a house in London, but as far as he was concerned, always Africa first. So his spirit is in Africa, and his spirit is in with me. And the work that I do, I think I've had some wonderful feedback from schools, because children end up generating narratives, whether they're visual, written, musical narratives, from just pulling objects from a trunk, and they learn about the history of Marcus Garvey. For example, very few people would know, certainly unless you are a Garveyite and follow his history, that in Jamaica he had a white friend, and they were very close, Joyce Reary, until the parents wanted her back in London and said that he couldn't befriend a white child. So that's when he began to learn about racism, because he didn't know anything about racism when he had this white friend in Jamaica. So there are some narratives that I bring out in this story. I talk about the stowaway, Evelyn Wachampe, the only female, one or two female stowaways on the Windrush, which has nothing to do with my father's trunk, but I link in migration studies. The whole idea that we can use vessels to travel from one point to another for a better life, and how we experience that resettlement when we come to London. And that helps those children, for example, we've all had journeys of migration, whether it's moving from one house to another, whether we've traveled from, you know, Afghanistan, from India, from the Philippines, from Ukraine. So that unpacking that trunk has brought children together from all different parts of the world, and to understand, you know, that basically we all have our different journeys around migration. So I've come so far from discovering my father's trunk, which holds dear, I suppose, memories of heritage and belonging.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Grace. That was the last of your 4 items. My goodness, and we have learned so much, and there is still so much that we can listen to, because you have a lot to say, and it's lovely to hear all the experiences. But I know that there are many things we haven't covered, but seeing out of those 4 things that we have covered, because you have talked about those 4 things, I'm going to ask you very quickly, and I am going to say quickly because time is now racing ahead with us, and I want to give our guest audience a chance to actually ask some questions. Out of those 4, if you had to choose one only in order to pass on, as it were, the baton to the next generation, which of those 4 will you choose, and why?
Well, curiously, I would probably say the library protest.
Okay.
Because I think from that, it gave me the ability. I was invited on to become a Labour Party member. I joined the Labour Party, and then I became an equality officer. And that meant fighting for equality in its widest possible context: class, creed, colour, you know, sexual orientation, and making sure that everybody has a fair slice of the cake and there are no barriers to prevent anybody from progressing. And through that, I had an invitation from various friends within Labour Party and outside. Why don't you think about becoming a councillor? Because you see, when you know you can make a difference, there's no stopping you. And it's not just you're not on your own. You cannot make a difference on your own. It's collective action that makes a difference. And we all need to know the power of our own ability to bring about change. So I think the library campaign, because the libraries are important, they're hubs for protest, they're hubs for security, and they help us learn and develop. So for making a difference as a protester through libraries, I was able to move onto a journey that would, and it wasn't automatic, it wasn't linear. I became recognized by the residents, who then decided with my Labour friends that I was worthy of enough. I had to campaign with my colleagues in the Labour Party. We had to work together. You know, you worked in the marginal wards. If you were in a marginal ward, you campaigned there and you go somewhere else. You're not just focused on the ward where you've been selected to represent, like Walpole for me. You go to Northfields, you go to Pitt's Hanger.
Grace, I can hear if I let you, you're going to go off on another story. Folks, do you understand why I said in the introduction she is a storyteller? Okay. I've just asked her to summarize which one would she pass on, and she's gone off at another story. So I'm going to pull back the baton and say that what you're saying, therefore, this whole power, the power of the ability, you know, what struck me, what you said there, once you know that you can protest, once you know your voice, once you know that, it is so powerful that people cannot take it away. Yes. And I think, you know, when you say that, it just leads me back again, but I'm not going to stay there, back to this whole voice you've given via WAPI. The voice you've given to young people. It does feel in every which way it's a very, very, very big thing for you, because you are constantly sharing your voice, either the physical voice or just by the work that you're doing. So I just want to take this time to thank you very, very much indeed, Grace. You've done many things in a local community, but I think, you know, the biggest thing this evening is your passion to tell us and share with us where your passion comes from. Now, just before I ask for questions, I believe that there was a poem you wanted to share with us. Have you still got that there? And that will be the last thing before I say to people, you know, well, please put your questions in the chat box, because we're coming towards a closing down time in terms of when we finish talking to Grace, but there's a time for Q&A. But Grace, please share your poem.
Thank you. It's called Legacy, inspired by work I did in conjunction with Ealing Rises, a national portrait project with, I think, Ealing and other organisations. So this is what I wrote. Legacy. He spoke about his work as a naval officer, and I was once fortunate enough to travel with him on board a ship he navigated. He was my father, Solomon Cllr Quansah. Handsome, learned, disciplined, proud, dressed in white and proud in black. A staunch Pan-Africanist, hence the reason why he worked for the Black Star Line. His spirit was always in Ghana, in Africa. So it's not surprising at all that Dad spent his final years there. I see the image and remember the trip with him and my mum, how he took me to the upper deck and showed me how the captain steered the ship, how the tapping of a strange looking instrument was a type of language that somehow gave signals to other ships of where my father's ship was heading. I think of and smell the sea, the dolphins feeling sick, movement from one land, England, to another, Ghana. In reverse, not as my ancestors made that wretched transatlantic middle passage journey, but somehow free in mind, body and soul. Thank you, Dad, Solomon Cllr Quansah. I hear you. Your legacy stays with me. I can't hear you, Marge.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for everything that you've shared. I could say an awful lot more, but we've gone on quite a long time, and I do want to give people a chance to ask questions. Mervyn wants to ask a question already. So I think, Mervyn, you're going to come in really quickly, and then we can open it up for the audience. Please type in your questions very, very quickly so that we can put things to Grace. Otherwise, I can ask her so many things.
Likewise, a few things come to mind. Marge, you'll have to decide how many she can answer.
Okay.
One is, in terms of passing on the baton, you have this wonderful image of all the things coming out of the trunk. But if you think of that as a metaphor for passing things on to the next generation, if there is one thing that you could pass on to the children as your legacy, what would that one thing be? And while you're thinking about that, you've also given a platform for many young people to write their stories. Are we going to see your story in print sometime soon?
Two very good questions.
Let's have those two first.
Okay, all right.
You're like these people who want to take up the whole evening by asking all the multiple questions.
I think because I struggled as a child at school to be heard, to achieve, and I don't, when you say success, I know that's an interesting, you have to have confidence and you have to believe in yourself to see that you're successful. I want to see every child believe in themselves, never give up, because, you know, there's institutional racism out there, there's overt racism out there, and life is not getting any easier. So fight, never give up, never give up. Always believe in yourself and just lap up any support that comes your way from anybody. I think that's what I'd like children, if that would be my legacy one day. I always want young people to believe in themselves and never give up fighting, no matter what, because it's not your color that defines you. Yes, it is your color that defines you, but not negatively, positively, or your class, or your gender, or your sexuality, or your disability. Your abilities are there. And, you know, I'm a Black woman from Africa, but I've also, you have to understand intersexuality. There are different things that define me as well as my Blackness. So for me to give that baton to the children would be never give up fighting and always believe in yourself, because if you don't achieve here, or if you failed in this exam, believe you will pass. Get up. I fell down when I was a child running, and I lost the race for my colleagues when I did the relay back in Hobbain. I could have stopped running. It didn't stop me from running. I ran another race and won. I then got my medal. So never give up. Sometimes failure is not nice. It's not nice to be told that you failed, but sometimes we have to, you know, step back a little bit, because it makes that thirst for success, for achievement, even more important. The second question, yes, I do want to write my book, in fact, and I'm looking at you, Mervyn, trust me. I started writing it in my head a long time ago, and my difficulty is whether it's going to be based on my life or whether it's going to be based on the lives of others, but with me shaping some of that in the background. But you will see a book, and I'm so glad you have mentioned it, because I will be in touch with you, because you are my inspiration. What you have done in terms of I Can't Breathe in the film and everything else, how you put together the WAPI books, you are my inspiration, both of you. So there's nobody else I will look to apart from yourselves and Uncle Eric to help guide me to put that book together, because as you can tell, I'm so busy developing everybody else that I'm developing myself at the same time, but it's time for you to read and hear and see my book. So yes.
Thank you. Now, just in case Mervyn want to take it up the whole story, I'm going to now go to a question we had from Pauline. And Pauline asked, she says, thank you for the work you've done in the UK, but there is almost like a but have you done, or are you planning to do anything in Ghana in educating the locals on the pivotal role that they have played in history? So I'm just going to summarize it. Are you planning to do anything in Ghana? Any educational work there?
Yes, I think that's a very good question, actually. A friend of mine at Acton Hill Methodist Church. In fact, Dr. Chris Spring was working at the British Museum, and I used to do storytelling at church. And then one day he contacted the British Museum and didn't tell me. And I got this phone call some 18 years ago saying, "We don't know you, but you know us." And I got interviewed, and that's how I got into the British Museum with the work that I do as an educator. And the reason why I say that, that's a bit of backdrop to the fact that he, not long ago, came from Ghana. He's an artist, and he does a lot of work around Africa. And he was at a school, he said, that's doing some work. I think they've opened up some kind of school, which I said I would love to be involved, possibly first doing some online work and then traveling back to Ghana. In fact, before the pandemic, 42 of us, including Uncle Eric, Toop, a storyteller, my children, some members of WAPI, parents, we were planning to go to Amata Edu Center in Accra, and Nana Achampon, writer out there, was going to receive us, and we were also going to link up with Rita Marley because she has a project there. You know, we were going to go to Ghana, and the pandemic stopped us. And since then, I've had to rethink how is it going to be possible, because obviously the nature of travel is expensive now. But it is definitely, thank you very much for asking that question. I will be going, but maybe first on an individual basis with a small group to see what can be done, because I do think it is very important to connect what I'm doing here with Ghana. And I found out about an organization called the Busia Legacy Foundation, where I was asked to do a presentation a few weeks ago, set up by a Ghanaian inspirational woman. I know her first name is Christine, and she also has got a shop here where she's sending some stuff to Ghana. I've donated some clothes to that shop, and I think through that organization too, I can work out how I can support my family and friends and people I do not know in Ghana, because there's so much work to be done. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly jump to a question from Donald, and then once I've done that, we're going to have to move on in terms of timing. And
there's one from Annette as well.
Oh, I see. I didn't see Annette's question, but I'm going to go to Donald. Oh, yes. Donald, it says, how can we encourage more people from our community to get involved in the political process, and in particular in local politics?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, I think firstly, it's important that for me, we have to be careful what we absorb in terms of the news, because every news is infiltrated with propaganda and bias. But if I think that encourage, when we've got some elections coming up, for example. So for me, I would encourage young people, even if they're not old enough to vote, for example, they can be engaged in workshops. I think of, for example, the Huntley Conference. It's a wonderful forum where you hear about the legacy of Walter Rodney and local writers talking about how they have had to resist racism and institutional obstacles that kind of stunt growth. So I've always taken young people, children, to places like that. And then, of course, schools are important forums for change. It's really important that we encourage schools to work with families, to encourage our youngsters to develop that consciousness raising approach. Just to not accept things and be willing to listen to discourse. I see a program, for example, I've got a little grandchild right now, and I've got two older grandchildren. They're aged 12 and 8, and there are fantastic programs like FYI and Children's News Round, and they talk. You see these youngsters, they engage in politics. You've got people like Greta Thunberg. You've got the green discussions, around how young people, they take responsibility to go out and protest about the environment, because we know that our children are the future. You know, so that we have to encourage our councils to actually put money into programs that will enable our youngsters to appreciate, you know, how to protect our environment, to how to challenge racism. There are things we can do using, you know, sort of like our councils as well, to encourage our children to be aware politically without brainwashing them. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope I've answered that question.
Thank you. Before I go to the question from Annette, there is Shirley has put on in the chat something about a book. Getting this book into schools might inspire conversation. So anyone who's interested, please, you know, copy and paste that one so they can come back to it later, that link. But Annette asked, she said, you spoke earlier about the struggles. I said it was going to be the last one, but we did say we'll have one more there, Annette. What or who inspired you to overcome? You know, you had a lot of struggles.
Wow.
The early struggles, yeah. Now we have to make this one tight so that we can do.
That's a very interesting question. There have been many people who have helped me, and I would say that my mother has struggled a lot when she had me as a child, because my dad passed away, and I've seen her, you know, bring me up. It wasn't an easy relationship because I didn't know her for 7 years and I was already looking after myself. So she had to deal with me as a child who was always asking questions. And, you know, just the fact that she was a single mother, raising me, working at night, I had to eventually say, thank you, Mum, because you put it in me, you instilled me with these values that no matter what, you know, you are going to look after me and you're going to make sure that I always come first. So I do think that my mother was an inspiration, and she helped me to believe that anything was possible and that my gender was no limitation whatsoever. And where I came from, even though it's terrible, I experienced dreadful racism, but I knew how to fight back. She's not the only example, but I would like to say my mother, if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, folks, we're going to stop the questions for now. Do stay on. I'm just going to tell you about what's going to happen next month and so on, because if you stay on, Grace is going to be staying with us, and you can ask, we can come off camera in a while, and then you can ask further question in our afterglow. But it's really now time for me to say a huge thank you to you, Grace, because someone has put in the chat, I understand now why she's a storyteller. Yes, indeed. I think we are left in doubt about Grace's storytelling ability, and she has a lot of stories to tell. And she was introduced as someone who was inspirational for her activism, for her storytelling, for her educational work, and so on. And she has done an awful lot. It's interesting, I didn't say anything about her counselor work in terms of being a local counselor. And yet, I guess what we see is that everything about who we are, who she is, has actually fed into that, and that is what feeds into us having someone who we think can truly represent us. So it's really, thank you very much for all of the inspiration, the words of wisdom, but for me far more is the power that comes from the passion, from saying that you want to make a difference. All my belly is boiling now that I have imbibed from what you have said. Now a little bit further, let me tell you a little bit about what's going to happen next month. Next month, we plan to do a Windrush talk, as it were. By that, I mean that we're seeking to have, we've not got all our speakers as yet, but we know that we've got a couple of confirmed speakers who will be talking about the actual Windrush, but we'll also be talking about other elements about the Windrush story. And by that, I'm really saying about not just those people who came on Empire Windrush ship, but that whole group and those individuals, like say my parents and so on, and the difference that they've made, and how we're trying to keep that understanding of what they've done alive. So that's going to be the subject of our critical conversation next month. And that's next month, I believe. It's May the 25th, but we will be sending information out to everyone who's on the platform and others as well. Now, I'm just, again, also going to say to you, please share. We started this in lockdown, and we started it, as Mervyn said at the front end, as a result of the killing of George Floyd. But it has been going, and what we're trying to do is to have a place where we can speak where we can inspire, where we can grow together, and where we can have a sense of it's like a solidness where our feet is planted on firm ground, because we know that we can share and there are people we can go to and ask questions and get some answers. So keep supporting, please, and tell your friends and come back again. And do share. We've now got our dedicated BlakPak YouTube channel. Do share the information with your friends that they can go and see some of the stuff that we have done in the past. So thank you very much. Thank you, Grace. Thank you to the crew that works behind the scenes that we don't see. But if it wasn't for them, I'd be feeling pretty nervous. I didn't know what was going on. So thank you to all of those. Thank you, Mervyn, my co-host.
Thank you, Mervyn.
And we're going to go